Namaskaram, everyone. So in this meeting, we will be discussing about Michael's new book, Āṇma Viddai. So it got published, I think, last year, but we wanted to talk about how Michael wrote this book and some questions about what is in the book, and also we can open up for follow-up questions at the end. So the first question I have for Michael today is, what inspired you to choose this particular work of Bhagavan among all other Bhagavan's work?
Well, I didn't really choose it as such. I have been for many years now, I've been trying to refine and post all my translations of Bhagavan's original writings online. I've been doing it very slowly because of so many other commitments. So some years ago, I started to revise my translation of Āṇma Viddai. And when it came to posting it online, I decided that there's so much rich meaning in the verses, more explanation was required. So after posting the translation, I wrote a detailed explanation of each verse and posted one by one. That is, for each verse, I posted one article on my blog. When I had finished that, then the thought occurred to me that I've written so much it could form a book. And what I did when I was writing my explanation, I mean, whenever I write any explanation of Bhagavan's writings, I always connect with other writings of his. So I have quoted extensively from Nana, Ulladu Padeshundia, and other works of Bhagavan. So I felt this formed a very thorough introduction to the basic principles of Bhagavan's teachings. Because the thing about Bhagavan's verses, they have a meaning, but more than just having a meaning, they have a huge amount of implication. So it's the implication that I try to make clear when I explain the verses. So that connects with so many other parts of, so many other things that Bhagavan has written in works like Ulladu and so on. So I felt this was covering all the basic principles of Bhagavan's teachings. So I thought it would be a useful book. So it didn't start off with an intention to be a book, but that idea occurred after it was all completed.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, as you say, like when we read Bhagavan's works, it is better to relate to other works so that we get the full implied meaning of it.
Exactly. That is, Bhagavan has implied far more than he said explicitly. He's left it for us to understand. That is why it is always said in classical Advaita Vedanta, it's always said three things: Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Sravana literally means hearing, but what it implies is paying close attention to the teachings, whether it's in a written form or oral form, paying close attention in order to understand clearly what is being said. But then when we read something or hear something, we naturally interpret it according to our understanding. So we have to think carefully about it to be sure that we've understood it fully, to make sense of it all, to connect with all the other things that we've learned. So this is called manana. This is thinking deeply about it. And at the stage of manana, we are not just, as I say, it's not just a meaning, it's what is implied by that meaning. So there's a huge amount of implication in all of Bhagavan's own writings. So we have to pay close attention to what he's saying, We have to think about it to understand what he is implying by that. And then nididhyasana literally means deep contemplation. That means we have to put it into practice. Putting it into practice means turning our attention within to attend to ourselves. So, but we can't practice correctly unless we've understood what it is we have to practice. So understanding the teachings correctly through Sravana Manana is essential if we are to practice it correctly. And then it's not just we do first Sravana, then Manana, then Nididhyasana, and it's over. When we put it into practice, we gain more clarity from within, and then we're able to understand more meaning. The same thing when we read it again, we see more meaning in it, more implication in it. So it's an iterative process, Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. This should be going on throughout our life. And in this way, as our practice grows deeper, our understanding grows deeper. Each feeds into the other.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah. So can you give us a background of Āṇma Viddai, and then also give us a summary of all the verses?
Okay. Murugana came to Bhagavan in 1923. So he was with Bhagavan for just about the last half of the time Bhagavan was living in Tiruvannamalai. In the early days when Bhagavan was living in Tiruvannamalai, people knew very little about his teachings because Bhagavan didn't give any teachings of his own accord. He answered questions, but in his view, what exists is only jnana. So he doesn't see any ajnana or any ajnani. So he doesn't see any need to give any teachings of his own accord. So it's only when people prompt him that he gives teachings. So in the very early days, the main teachings that Bhagavan gave were what he gave to Shiva Prakasham Pillai, because Shiva Prakasham Pillai asked a very appropriate question. The first question he asked Bhagavan is, Swami, who am I? Which was exactly what Bhagavan had, that is, Arunachala Shiva had appeared in this world in the form of Bhagavan Ramana just to give those teachings. So it was the guru and the disciple were so well attuned. So the series of questions and answers that the series of questions asked by Shiva Prakasham Pillai and answers that Bhagavan gave, Shiva Prakasham Pillai made a note of them all. Many of the things Bhagavan, in those days, that was around 1901 or so, in those days Bhagavan was talking very little. So he would often write answers either on a slate with a chalk, or sometimes he would write in the sand. So Shiva Prakasham Pillai made a note of whatever Bhagavan replied to him. Some of them may have been oral, but a lot of them were in writing. But not if it's on a slate, it'll get rubbed out sooner or later. So Shiva Prakasham Pillai, in his notebooks, he made a note of all the replies he got from Bhagavan. But he took this for his own benefit. He had no idea in those days of publishing it. That wasn't published for more than 20 years, so nobody knew about it. How it came to be published is in 1922 or 23. I can't remember which year exactly it was. Shiva Prakasham Pillai had written a biography of Bhagavan in verse called Sri Ramcharita Ahaval. Ahaval is a particular style of verse, a particular meter in Tamil, but it's not individual verses. It's one long verse, and it can go on for any number of lines. So in this style, he had written a biography of Bhagavan. And when writing that biography, he summarized, in a portion of it, he summarized the teachings he'd received from Bhagavan. So he had a nephew called Manikam Pillai, who was very devoted to him and served him all his life. So Manikam Pillai wanted to publish this. And when he wanted to publish it, he said, let us also include the questions and answers that the questions you asked and the answers that Bhagavan gave. So Shiv Prakasham Pillai agreed. So Manikam Pillai prepared the manuscript and brought it to Bhagavan for Bhagavan to submit to Bhagavan to get Bhagavan's blessings. When Bhagavan read the questions and answers, as an appendix at the end, at that time, I think it was 25 questions and answers. That's the essence of what he had recorded. When Bhagavan saw the answer to the first question, he said, oh, I didn't say all this, because Sri Prakasham Pillai had added more for his own clarification. Then Bhagavan himself said, no, I didn't say this. Sri Prakasham Pillai had added this for his own clarification, let it remain. But the actual answer Bhagavan gave to the first question was, when Sri Prakasham Pillai asked, Swami, who am I? Bhagavan replied, Arive Nan. That is, awareness alone is I. So all the other bit about the body is not I, that is the neti portion, that was all added by Sri Prakasham Pillai, but Bhagavan approved it and let it remain there. And then the second question he asked was, what is the nature of that Arivu? And Bhagavan replied to that, Satchidananda. So that question, so until that book was published, nobody except for Sri Prakasham Pillai and Bhagavan and Manikam Pillai, nobody else knew that Bhagavan had given such teachings. And there was also later, it came to light about what about the same time, another devotee, a much older devotee called Gambhiram Seshya, he had come to Bhagavan with, he had read in English many books on Vedanta and on yoga, including what in those days was just newly published works of Vivekananda, his Raja Yoga and the other books that he had written. So Gambhiram Seshya wasn't able to understand things that were not clear to him. He asked Bhagavan for clarification. So he brought these English books to Bhagavan, showed the portions that he weren't clear to him, and asked Bhagavan to explain. So Bhagavan wrote a summary of what was in English, he wrote in Tamil. But Gambhiram Seshya also asked some other questions. So the notes that were recorded by Gambhiram Seshya is a mixture of answers that Bhagavan himself gave and summaries that Bhagavan had written of what was already in those books. That came to light even after Nana was published in the late 1920s, and then Natanananda edited it into a form of what is now Vichara Sangraham. So Vichara Sangraham is not the pure teachings of Bhagavan. It's maybe 10 or 20% at most is the actual original teachings of Bhagavan. Other things are just summaries of the books that, or the passages of the books that, English books that Gambhiram Seshya brought to Bhagavan. Apart from that, very little was known about Bhagavan's teachings. It was only in the around about, I think Aksharamlaya was maybe written about 1914 or 15. Shortly after that, Arunachya Patikam, Arunachya Ashtakam were written. And then later, Aranacha Pancharatnam. But these were all between about 1915 and 1920. So before that, nobody really knew what Bhagavan's teachings were. Everyone knew Bhagavan is a great. They had high respect for him. He was called Brahmana Swami because people seeing him sitting absorbed in samadhi, unmindful of the body and everything. Everyone knew Bhagavan is great, but what is it that Bhagavan has brought was known to very few people until Nana was published in about 1922 or 23. So when Murugana came, it was at a time when most people didn't know about Bhagavan's teachings. The only work that claimed to be, before that, the only work that claimed to be an account of Bhagavan's teachings was Ramana Gita. But Ramana Gita didn't really, that is, as Bhagavan said, they ask questions with a certain motive. So I answered according to their, that is, because they asked questions about society, about the uplift of society, about Shakti and Siddhi and things, which is not really what Bhagavan has come to teach. Bhagavan has come to show the path of Bhakti and Jnana. That very little is there in Ramana Gita. It is there, but not. No, it's not. It's mixed up with so many other things. So most people didn't really know what Bhagavan's teachings were until the time Murugana came, which was at the same time Nana was published. So when Murugana came, after the first 1 or 2 days he was there, another devotee approached him and said, Bhagavan is a Mihapariya Vastu. He's a very, very great Vastu means he's a big, very big thing, a very big reality. But nobody can get anything from him directly. But there's his foremost disciple is Kavyaganta. If you go to him, if I can take you to him and he will give you mantra diksha. If you do mantra japa, then only you'll be able to gain anything from Bhagavan. First you have to do the mantra japa and then only you'll be in a position to gain anything from Bhagavan. Otherwise you can't get anything directly from Bhagavan. His path is too steep and too difficult. This was a surprise to Murugana. He wasn't expecting that. So the person who approached him said, think about it. I'll come back later and you can tell me your decision. So when he came back later and asked Murugana, have you decided, do you want to take mantra diksha from Kavyaganta? Murugana said, I came only for Bhagavan. If Bhagavan chooses to bestow his grace on me, well and good. If he doesn't choose to bestow his grace on me, I am not ready to go to anyone else. So Murugana knew that there was this prevalent idea, even among the devotees of Bhagavan, but Bhagavan's path is too difficult for anyone to follow. But by Bhagavan's grace, Murugana discovered for himself how easy is this path. So in April of 1927, it was at about the same time that Bhagavan wrote Upadesha at Murugana's request. I'm not quite sure which came first, whether it was Āṇma Viddai or Upadesha, but they were both more or less in the same month. So because Murugana knew how easy this path is, he wanted to get a statement from Bhagavan how easy it is. So Murugana wrote the Pallavi and Anupallavi for a Kirtana. A Kirtana is a particular style of song in South Indian classical music. It consists of a Pallavi, which means a refrain, an Anupallavi, which is a sub-refrain or post-refrain, and a series of charananga, of verses. So
Sorry, I have a quick question.
Yes.
Sorry to Michael.
Yes.
So you explained about the history of all this. So it's so good to hear that. So one question is, how did you gather this history? So some of the points that you say makes total sense, because, like, for example, gaining the siddhis, because Bhagavan himself in his Ulladu Narpadu said, Pira siddhikal ellam soppanamam siddhikale. So
Yeah.
Bhagavan will for sure not recommend us
Yeah.
to gain
Yeah.
something else from external world. It all makes sense. But
Yeah.
just curious to know, like, how you know about history of, like, for example, Vichara Sangraham. Like, how, is there any place that you got this information from, or it is from Sadhu Om, or just curious to know?
A lot of it I got from Sadhu Om. Also, a lot I got from Swami Natyanananda.
Okay.
Swami Natyanananda came to Bhagavan in 1918. So Swami Natyanananda was very close to both Murugan and Sadhu Om. So I never met Murugan. Murugan left the body in 1973. I didn't come to Tiruvannamalai till 1976, so I never met Murugan. But I did meet Natyanananda many times. That is, together with Sadhu Om, I often used to go to Natyananda, and he would often tell stories about, like these things about how about Vichara Sangram, how he came to edit it. And he said something more about Vichara Sangram. First, he edited it in the form of questions and answers. Later, he rewrote it in the form of an essay. And when he rewrote in the form of an essay, he had omitted some portion, the bits about Ashtanga Yoga and Ashtanga Jnana and such things he had omitted. But some other devotees insisted that that should be added back again. So in if you see the chapters in the essay form of Vichara Sangram, which is in Ramana um, there's chapter 8 is mukti. So mukti should be logically mukti should be the conclusion, but then after mukti comes chapter 9 is yoga shtanga, about the eight limbs of yoga. Then comes 10 jnana ashtanga. And then comes Sannyasam or Mudivu. I think Sannyasa or Mudivu, they were supposed to be chapters 9 and 10 after Mukti. Because Mukti, why he had Sannyasa after Mukti is only Mukti is complete Sannyasa, the complete renunciation of everything. And Mudivu means the conclusion. So this Yoga Shtanga and Jnana Shtanga, with Bhagavan's approval, Natyananda had decided to omit that because it's really not Bhagavan's teachings at all. But some other devotees insisted that that should be added. That is why it makes no sense to have after Mukti, to have Yoga Shtanga and then Jnana Shtanga. So Jnana Shtanga means the 8 limbs of Jnana. I don't know where this came from. It could have been from, I think some of the books that Gambhir Seshe had written, had read and brought to Bhagavan, some of the English books. I think some of them were from the Theosophical Society. So maybe it was from some theosophical publication. This thing about because nowhere else we read about the 8 limbs of jnana. We know about the 8 limbs of yoga, but not 8 limbs of jnana. So, but whatever it is, it's not Bhagavan's teachings at all. So, so many things I learned from Natyananda, which you can't find in any books. And
Thank you.
also Kunju Swami often used to come to Sadhu Om, and he would tell so many stories. And he used to tell so many stories, but he didn't include in his book his reminiscences, because that was to be published by the ashram, and lots of stories that he liked to tell would not have appealed to the ashram management, so those stories are not included there. So many stories I heard from Kunju Swami, but we can't find in any books. I also heard some things from Ramasamy Pillai, but Ramasamy Pillai was tended to be more, though he could speak English, he would sometimes talk, he would sometimes tell something, but generally he was quite a reserved person. So I'd say the two main sources were Natyananda and Kunju and also some other elderly devotees. I mean, devoted people who had been with Bhagavan in the 1930s and 40s. Not sadhu devotees, but ordinary householder devotees, but they all had some stories to tell. There was one person from Bangalore, we used to call him Bangalore Ramasamy. He was in his 80s, but he had been coming to Bhagavan since about 1930. He had many stories to tell. There was another person, Nagarajya, who was as a boy, he told me the story himself. That is, it's written in the book Ashram, in the books. It's written differently, but how he told the story was different. That is, as a boy, when he was about 16 or something, he had already visited Bhagavan several times, but one time he decided, seeing that, thinking Bhagavan is equal to all, that is, in the dining hall, there was a partition. On one side would sit the Orthodox Brahmins. On the other side would sit all the non-Brahmins and any Brahmins who didn't observe orthodoxy. Bhagavan, the partition is here. Bhagavan will sit so he can see, he's facing the partition, but he had the partition slightly on his right. So he's Bhagavan himself. If you draw a straight line from the partition, Bhagavan is sitting on the non-Brahmin side, but he's sitting where he can see both sides. So Nagarajya, as a young boy, he came to Bhagavan and he thought, Bhagavan is equal to all, so why do I need to observe all this orthodoxy? So he sat among the non-Brahmins. Then Bhagavan questioned him, would you eat with non-Brahmins at home? He admitted, no, I wouldn't do so. Then Bhagavan said, don't make this place an excuse to do so. Why Bhagavan said that, Nagarajya himself said to me, why Bhagavan said that, he knew that it was out of ego. I was proud that I can sit among the non-Brahmins, but outside I would never. In those days, he said, now I don't observe all these orthodoxies. But in those days, I was brought up in a very orthodox family. I would never have eaten with non-Brahmins outside. That is why Bhagavan told me to go to that side. It doesn't mean, as some people have implied in some books, that Bhagavan approved of such orthodoxy. Bhagavan allowed everyone to do whatever they want. But he didn't want, because he knew that he knew my motive was, he said, basically I was showing off, but I can be equal just like Bhagavan. But the outward side, I would never have done that in those days. So the story is there in other books, but when I heard it from him, he explained it in a much clearer way, so that the reason why Bhagavan told him not to sit among the non-Brahmins, to sit with the Orthodox Brahmins, is because that's what he was doing outside. So Bhagavan said, don't make this place an excuse. In other words, Bhagavan was saying, don't show off. When you don't, if he would genuinely, there was many Brahmins who didn't observe orthodoxy were very happy to sit among the non-Brahmins. But those who observed orthodoxy, they sat on the other side. Because it's very seldom practiced nowadays, but in those days it was very prevalent. Orthodox Brahmins, they shouldn't even be seen by a non-Brahmin eating. So strict was their orthodoxy. That's why the partition was there. So Bhagavan respected that. If they want to do that, let them do it. But Bhagavan showing that he's not one of them. He sat on, as I said, if you draw a straight line from the partition, Bhagavan is sitting on the non-Brahmin side, but he's sitting facing, that Bhagavan sits on with his back to the wall, facing all the people, the non-Brahmins and the Brahmins. So many stories like that I heard from people who have been with Bhagavan. So a lot of things are things that are not in books. A lot of things I found, there's the same story, there are many different versions. If you hear the story from one devotee, if you mention that story to another devotee, they'll say, no, 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 it wasn't like that. I was there at the time, it was like this. The same story was remembered differently. I'm not, both was, that is the one who said the story this way and the one who said the story that way. Both were sincere, both believed what they said. But because they understood Bhagavan's actions differently, they told the story differently. So one thing I learned from that is whatever stories we read about Bhagavan, we have to take more with a pinch of salt. Because Bhagavan didn't write these stories. It's how they were seen or interpreted by different people. Different people see the same thing in different ways. They understand it differently. So yeah. But as I say, the two main sources I would say were Kunju Swami and Natyananda. Sadhu Om, I heard many stories from him, but many of these things happened long before Sadhu Om came. Sadhu Om didn't come to Bhagavan until 1946. So he was living in Tiruvannamalai only during the, from the end of 1946 till the summer of 1950. He was living there continuously. But that's only, what, about 3.5 years or so he was living there. So that was right at the tail end of Bhagavan's life. But of course, he'd heard many stories from Murugan and from so many other old devotees. So I did hear a lot of things from Sadhu Om, but first-hand accounts were mainly from Natyananda and Kunju Swami.
Sure. Thank you, Michael, for explaining that.
Yeah. So coming back to this, so this, I was explaining about this kirtana. It's a particular style of song, and the charanangal, the verses, each one ends with the pallavi, the refrain. So they're all connected with the meaning of the pallavi. So the pallavi contains the essence of the song. So Murugan wrote the pallavi and anupallavi and asked Bhagavan to write the charanangal. So by writing the pallavi, he sets the theme of the song and allows Bhagavan to explain it. So shall I go through the meaning of the verses now?
Yes, Michael, but you were about to explain how the intention of Muruganar to begin that.
His intention was to get because he knew from his own experience how easy it is. And Bhagavan himself said so many times it's easy, but the prevalent idea among Bhagavan's devotees or Bhagavan's path, it's easy for Bhagavan, but it's difficult for us. That was the usual attitude people had. So Murugan wanted Bhagavan to explain why it is easy. So that was his motive in asking Bhagavan to, that was his motive in writing this pallavi, in order, the pallavi and anupallavi he wrote. So shall I go through the meaning of the verses now?
Yes, Michael, please.
So the pallavi is very simple. Aye atisulapum, Āṇma Viddai, aye atisulapum. Aye is an exclamation. Āṇma Viddai, well, atisulapum, that is, ati means extremely, and sulapam means easy. So, extremely easy. Atma-vichara are extremely easy. That is, Āṇma Viddai is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit term Atma-vichara. Atma means oneself. Vidya means knowledge or art or science or it's it's got many meanings. Like any art or any science is a vidya. Um, uh, but in the case of Atma-vichara, it means the science of self. What it implies is knowing oneself. Um, so the implied meaning of Āṇma Viddai is knowing oneself. So the meaning is knowing oneself is so extremely easy, so extremely easy. So that is the Pallavi. That comes at the end of every verse. So every verse is explaining the idea in this Pallavi. Though this was written by Murugan, it was this is what he had learned from his own experience. It is also what he'd heard Bhagavan saying so many times. And then the Anupallavi, which is the post refrain, what Murugan wrote in the post refrain is Noya Tamakum Ulankai Amalakani Poya Oriya Miku Meyai Uludu Āṇma. What that means is oneself exists as or is as so very real, even for those who are simple-minded, that an amalaka fruit on the palm ends as unreal or fades away as unreal. The analogy of an amalaka fruit. Amalaka is actually it's a Sanskrit term. In Tamil, it's called an nelikani. And I think in English, it's often referred to as amla. I think amla is probably the Hindi word, I'm not sure, or it may also be a Sanskrit word, but amla is the usual word by which people know it in English. It's a small sort of grape-sized fruit, and the expression, an amalaka on the palm, means something is very, very obvious, very, very clearly known. It's as clear as an amalak on the palm. That's an expression that is used in many Indian languages. It's a way of saying that something is extremely clear. If you've got an amalak on the palm of your hand, you cannot doubt it. It's very obvious. So that's used. So as clear as an amalak on the palm means it's very, very clear, very, very obvious. So, but what Murugan is saying here, oneself is so very real, even for the most simple-minded, even for the most dull-witted, that in comparison, even an amalaka is something. You can't compare. It's so oneself is so very obvious. It cannot even be compared to how obvious it is having an amalaka on the palm of your hand. So many people think Atma is something unknown. But what Murugan is saying here, it's so very obvious. Because what Atma actually means is oneself. We all know ourselves. We all know I am. So it's something that is so very obviously real that even the most simple-minded, you ask even the most dull-witted person, do you exist? Yes, of course I am. I know I am. Everyone knows I am. So it's Murugan is emphasizing here how very obvious we ourselves are. More than any other thing, we are what is very real and very clear. And this idea is taken up by Bhagavan in the first verse. What Bhagavan says in the first verse is, though oneself exists incessantly and indubitably as real, the body and world which are unreal arise sprouting as real. So what is actually real is only oneself. The body and world are unreal, but somehow they arise appearing as if they're real. And then Bhagavan goes on to say, when unreal darkness-pervaded thought is dissolved without reviving even an iota, in the realities-pervaded heart space, oneself, the sun, will certainly shine by oneself. Darkness will cease, suffering will end, happiness will surge forth. If we read it superficially, there may seem to be no connection between the first sentence and the second sentence. The first sentence is saying that though we exist incessantly and indubitably as real, the body and world, which are unreal, arise sprouting as real. So what connection does that have with thought? If we know Bhagavan's other works, we will know, as he says, for example, in Nana, that the world is nothing but thoughts. What Bhagavan means by the term thought, that often when we talk about thoughts, people just think of the mental chatter going on in the mind. But Bhagavan uses the term thought in a much broader sense. All mental phenomena of any kind are thoughts. And as he explains in Nana, the world is nothing but thoughts. If you remove all thoughts, there's no such thing as world. That is, in what sense is it just thought? That is, the world is, what we know as the world is just a series of mental impressions. As he says in verse 7 of Ulladu the world is the five kinds of sense. The world is the five kinds of sense impressions. Thereunto, nothing else. That is, what we know as the world is just a collection of sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and tactile sensations. Without these, where is any world? That is, so what Bhagavan is implying there, and he then goes on to say, these are all known by the mind. One mind knows all these five kinds of sense impressions. So is there a world apart from the mind? So what Bhagavan implies is the world is nothing but a mental impression. That is what we call sense impressions. Sight is a, I mean, sight is a sense, it's all sights, everything we see, they're all visual impressions. They're impressions from that we receive through the eyes. Sounds are auditory impressions. But all these are, we experience them as mental impressions. That is, it's the eyes aren't actually seeing anything. The eyes are just like the window. The one who is seeing is ego, is the mind. So these are all mental impressions. So the world is nothing but a series of mental impressions. That is why there's no difference between the world we experience in waking and the world we experience in dream. People say, oh, but in dream, everything is very fleeting. It's not real, but this world is real. But when we're actually experiencing it, the world we experience in dream is very real to us. Even if things are changing, sometimes in some dreams, 1 minute we'll be maybe in Tiruvannamalai, the next minute we're in New York or something. So things sort of change, or we're talking to a friend and suddenly it becomes our father or something like that. All sorts of, some dreams are very unstable. But essentially, a dream is no different to a waking state, or a waking state is no different to a dream. There are different qualities of dream. But likewise, sometimes if we are in the waking state, if we're extremely tired, everything is a bit dreamlike. So it's the quality of the experience is not that is the quality of the experience may vary, but the essence of the experience is the same. Both in waking and dream, what we are experiencing as the body and world is nothing but a series of mental impressions. So when Bhagavan uses the word thought, he means mental impression of any kind whatsoever, mental phenomena of any kind whatsoever. So the reason he first talks about the body and world and then switches over to talking about thought, is that the body and world are nothing but thoughts. That we have to understand. It's not stated here explicitly, but it's clearly implied. So why do the body and world appear as if real? Well, that is, why do they appear? And why, having appeared, do they seem to be real? It's all because of thought. It's thought that creates this, this appearance of the world and gives it its seeming reality. So Bhagavan says in the second sentence, when this thought is dissolved without reviving even an iota, in the heart space of oneself, the sun, when he refers to ourself as the sun, he implies the sun of pure awareness will certainly shine by oneself or by itself. That we ourselves will shine by ourselves. And he refers to thought as darkness pervaded. Darkness implies ignorance. And he refers to the heart space as reality pervaded, because that is contrasting darkness and reality. So reality is light, darkness is ignorance. And then, when he says oneself the sun, he means the sun of pure awareness. In other words, ourself as we actually are will certainly shine by oneself. That will shine spontaneously. Darkness will cease. That implies the darkness of self-ignorance will cease. Suffering will end. Happiness will surge forth. In the final clause of each of these 5 verses, he ends with talking about happiness. In this verse, he says, Imbum pongame, happiness will surge forth. Then I'll just get the other. In the second verse, he says, Imba taname. Taname means the abode of happiness. The third verse, he says, Imba vikasame. That means happiness will shine forth. The fourth verse, Imba ambodie. Imba bambodie. That means the ocean of happiness. And in the final verse, he ends with the words imbu torname. So in all these verses, Bhagavan is emphasizing that the result of knowing ourselves is happiness. So the verses are all going on in very much the same way. So, and then the implication is, therefore, extremely easy is self-knowledge. Why is it so easy? Because what is real is only ourself. Even though the world and body appear as if real, they're not actually real. What is actually real is ourself. And he uses two adjectives. He says nirantaram. Nirantaram means without an interval, uninterrupted, continuous, constantly. That is, we ourselves are always shining. There's never a moment when we do not know ourselves. Throughout the waking state, we know I am. Throughout the dream state, we know I am. Throughout sleep, we know I am. So it is nirantara, it's uninterrupted. The other adverb he uses can be interpreted in 2 ways, depending on how we split it. It can mean, it can be ayadu, which means not doubting, without doubting, indubitably. That's one meaning. The other way we can take it is, we split the verse slightly differently. It can be nayadu. Nayadu means imperishably. So it's either incessantly and indubitably or incessantly and imperishably. So oneself exists incessantly, indubitably, and imperishably as real. That is the truth. But though that is the case, the body and world, which are unreal, somehow they appear as if real. Why do they appear as if real? Because of thought. So in order to put an end to this unreal appearance, all we need to do is to put an end to thought. So he says, when thought, which is pervaded by unreal darkness, implying the darkness of ignorance, namely ego, is dissolved without reviving even an iota. In other words, when manonasa is attained, in the heart space, which is what is real, oneself, who is the sun of pure awareness, will certainly shine by oneself, meaning spontaneously. So why does that mean that self-knowledge is very easy? All we have to do is to put an end to thought. But how to put an end to thought, that is what he explains in the next verse. In the next verse, he says, in this verse, he explains what is the root of all thoughts, what is the first thought. He describes the thread on which the various thoughts are joined. What he says is, since the thought, the body composed of flesh, itself is I, alone is the one thread on which the various thoughts are joined. If one goes within thus implies investigating thus, what is the place from which I spread out? Thoughts will cease, and in the cave, Atma-vichara alone will shine spontaneously as I am I. This alone is silence, the one space, the abode of bliss. So how to put an end to thoughts? Since all thoughts are strung like beads on a single thread, all we have to do is to cut that thread. That thread is this first thought, I, which is the false awareness, I am this body. Or as he puts it here, una udal iduve nanam. This body composed of flesh itself is I. That is the root of all thoughts. That is this false awareness, I am this body, which is what is otherwise called ego. That is, as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body. That is the root of all thoughts. So all we need to do, it's the one thread on which the various thoughts are joined. So if you've got beads or diamonds or pearls or whatever it is on a string, if you cut the string, all will be scattered. Likewise, if we cut this root thought, I, we'll get rid of all other thoughts. So in order to get rid of thoughts, all we need to do is to get rid of this first thought, I. And how to get rid of this thought? We need to go within, investigating what is the place from which I sprout out. What does he mean here by what is the place? He's not talking, Bhagavan often uses the word place in a metaphorical sense. He's not talking about a physical place. He's talking about the source from which we rise as I. So what is the source from which we rise as I? That is, rise as I means rise as ego. Ego is the false awareness, I am this body. From where this arises is the fundamental awareness, I am, which is our being. So investigating what is the place from which I spreads out means investigating our own being, investigating this fundamental awareness, I am. If we go within investigating that, all thoughts will cease, and in the cave, meaning the cave of the heart, in the center of the heart, Atma-vichara will shine forth spontaneously as I am I. Here, Bhagavan makes it very clear why he uses this term nan-nan. Nan-nan means I am I. It's often mistranslated as I-I. But that is not the meaning intended by Bhagavan, because in Tamil, it's when you say a sentence, A is B, it's not necessary to include the verb is. It's understood. So if you've got two words in a sentence, a subject and a subject complement, the is understood. So, for example, if you want to say nane budal, that means I, this body. It implies I am this body. Nan idu means I this. It means I am this. Nan adu or adu nan means I am that, or that is I. So the copula, the verb to be, is understood in such sentences. Nan a means I who. Literally, there's no verb there, but it implies I am who, or who am I. So when he says nan nan, he means I am I. And it's clear, if we consider this verse carefully, it's clear why he says this. Now our experience of ourself is I am this body. We have a false identity. We wrongly identify ourselves with something other than ourselves. But what we actually are is nothing other than ourselves. So who am I? I am I, nothing other than I. That is the implication. So when we know ourselves as we actually are, we won't even know ourselves as I am Brahman. We will know ourselves just as I am I. That I is Brahman, but Brahman is just a word we use to refer to the ultimate reality when we do not actually have direct experience of it. When we know it as it is, we will know it only, we won't know it as Brahman, we'll know it only as I. So who am I? I am I. So here he makes it's very clear in this sentence, he's contrasting the false awareness, I am this body, with the real awareness, I am I. So I am I is our real identity, what we actually are. If we want an answer to the question, who am I? The only answer is I am I. But merely answering by words is not sufficient. We need to experience ourselves as nothing other than ourself alone. Now we experience ourselves as if we were this body. But that is a false awareness, because this body is something that appears and disappears in our view. It appears in waking. In dream, where is this body? We are not aware of it at all. We mistake some other body to be ourselves. So the awareness, I am this body, is a false awareness. The correct awareness of ourself is when we are aware of ourselves as I am I and nothing other than I. So when Atma-vichara means pure self-awareness, the real self-awareness, awareness of ourself as we actually are, when that shines forth as I am I, that state is what is called mona. Idu vai monamai. Ekavanamai, the one space. The one space implies the one space of pure awareness. Imbatanamai, the abode of bliss. So here he clearly indicates that what he means by silence is that state when we're aware of ourselves as we actually are, and thereby remain as we actually are. We remain as nothing other than I. I am I. When we experience ourselves as I am I, that is silence. There's no rising in that state. There's just pure being. And that is the one space of pure awareness. And then in the next verse, okay, so yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention at the end of that verse, every verse ends with the Pallavi. Ayayati solapum, Āṇma Viddai, ayayati solapum. That is all we need to do to know ourselves, is to turn within, investigating who am I, or what is the source from which I've risen. In other words, investigating our own being. If we do so, we will thereby subside back into ourself. All other thoughts will cease, and what will remain is the infinite silence of pure awareness, of pure being awareness, such it, ever shining as I am I alone. I am nothing other than I. So it is so extremely easy. And then in verse 3, he why should we know ourselves? We may ask. No, I'm okay. I'm okay as I am. I'm living my life. I'm reasonably happy. Of course, I've got some desires. If my desires are fulfilled, then I'll be perfectly happy. We may think to ourselves, but so many people are not even interested in knowing themselves. So Bhagavan here talks about, impresses upon us the need for knowing ourselves. He says, he begins by saying, Tanne aridal indri, pinne edu arihil aim. That means without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, so what? So what's the use of knowing anything else when we don't even know ourselves? If we don't know the knower, how can we rely on any knowledge we have? If our knowledge of the knower itself is unclear, whatever is known by this knower we cannot rely on any knowledge until we know ourselves, the knower. Who is the knower? So without knowing oneself, if one knows whatever else, so what? That's the first rhetorical question he asks. The second rhetorical question is, if one has known oneself, then what else exists to know? That is, the second question is in Tamil is, Tane arindidil pin enne ulludu ariya. That is, when we know ourselves, ego is thereby destroyed. When ego ceases, everything else ceases. And then what else is there to know? There's nothing else to know. Bhagavan says this very clearly in, for example, in, wait a second, I'll just get it. Upadesha Undiya, verse 27, he says, Arivaryamayum atra arivai, arivahum unmeidu undipara, Arivada kondrile undipara. What that means is only knowledge that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance is knowledge. That is only that awareness that is devoid of knowledge and ignorance about any other thing, that alone is the real knowledge. That alone is the real awareness. Unmeidu, this is real. Why is that? Because when we know ourselves, there's Arivadaku ondru ille, there's nothing for knowing. So when we know ourselves as we actually are, there's nothing else for us to know. That's what he implies here when he says, if one has known oneself, then what exists to know? What remains to know, to be known when we know ourselves? There's nothing else for us to know, because we alone are what actually exists. We alone are, when we know ourselves, ego is annihilated. When ego is annihilated, everything else that appeared only in the view of ego is also annihilated, and what then remains is ourself alone. So there's nothing else for us to know when we know ourselves. So trying to know anything other than ourselves is futile, because we can't, it cannot be real knowledge when we do not even know the reality of the knower. When we know the reality of the knower, we'll know that both the knower and the known both are unreal. What is real is only the underlying being awareness, such it, I am. And then he goes on to say, when one knows in oneself that self, which is the undivided light in separate sentient beings, within oneself, the shining of oneself will flash forth. The shining forth of grace, the annihilation of ego, the blossoming of happiness. What this implies is, when one knows in oneself, that self, that implies our real nature, what we actually are, which is the undivided light. Undivided light implies the light that shines. He says abhinna. Abhinna means without division or separation or distinction. In the separate or different sentient beings. Now we see so many sentient beings, human beings and cows and dogs and cats and elephants and birds and fish and all sorts of sentient beings are there. But they're all, each one is separate to each other one. But what is shining in each of them, that undivided light of awareness that is shining in every sentient being, that is one. So when one knows in oneself, that self, which is the undivided light, the light of pure awareness, that is shining in all these different living beings, within oneself, Atma-vichara. Atma-vichara means the shining of oneself, alone will flash forth. The word he used for flash forth is minnam. Minnam means, we talk about lightning flashes. That is the word for lightning in Tamil is min. So it implies it flashes forth like lightning. And then he says, Aral Vilasa. Aral Vilasa means the shining forth of grace. So the implication is this shining forth of this Atma-vichara, this is the shining forth, or Vilasa can mean shining forth, it can mean amorous play, or it can mean beauty. So it's the shining forth, the amorous play, or the beauty of grace. It is ahavinasa, the annihilation of ego. Imba vikasa, the blossoming of happiness. So he's always ending every verse with happiness. Therefore, extremely easy is knowing oneself. Because all we need to do is to cease knowing other things and to turn the same power of attention which we are now misusing to know other things, which are all unreal, as he said in the first verse. We use that same power of attention to turn within and know ourselves. This ego will be annihilated and the Atma-vichara will shine forth. That is the annihilation of the ego and the shining forth of that Atma-vichara are one and the same thing. When the sun rises, the darkness is dissolved. So the rising of the sun and the dissolution of the darkness, they're inseparable. They're one and the same thing. So when we know ourselves, that is the annihilation of ego. So all we need to do is to know ourselves. And to know ourselves, all we need to do is to turn our attention within. So are extremely easy. Āṇma Viddai are extremely easy. And then in the fourth verse, this is the verse where he says very, very explicitly, this is the easiest of all paths. He says, for the bonds beginning with action, that is karma, for the bonds beginning with karma to be untied, that's the bonds of samsara to be untied, to rise from the devastation beginning with birth. The devastation, that means samsara, the beginning with birth, that is the cycle of birth and death. And he refers to it as devastation. So to put an end to for the bondage of karma and to rise from the devastation of samsara, which begins with birth, more than whatever path, this path is what is exceedingly easy. He says, Kanmadi Katu Avera. That's for those bonds of karma to be untied. Janmadi Nattam. Nattam means nashtam. the devastation, beginning with birth, janmadi nashtam, error, to rise from that, emmagam adinum, immagam mikkalidu. This path is exceedingly easy. Why is it exceedingly easy? Because to follow any other path involves action. Because all other paths entail attending to something other than ourself. And attending to anything other than ourself is an action. But on this path, we don't have to do anything. All we have to do, we have to turn our attention back to ourselves. By turning our attention back to ourselves, we, the doer, subside. So self-attentiveness is not an action, but a cessation of all action. So in the next sentence, he says, after saying this path is exceedingly easy, he then explains why it is exceedingly easy. What he says is, Sol manada tanuvin kan madi siridindri, without the slightest action of word, mind, or body. These are three instruments of action. So without any action whatsoever, summa amandirika, when one just is, when one, amandu means when one rests, when one settles without the least action of mind, speech, or body. Amma, yeah, Amma is an expression of wonder. Ahatil Āṇma Viddai, in the heart, the light of oneself. There's no verb there, but it implies the light of oneself shines forth. So in the heart, the light of oneself alone. The eternal experience, fear does not exist, the ocean of bliss alone. So what that implies is that in the heart, the light of oneself will shine forth as I am I. It's not stated explicitly, but if we read along with the other verses, it's very clear that's what's implied. And having thereby drowned and lost oneself forever, lost ego forever in this perfectly peaceful and infinitely clear state of pure awareness, it will be clear that this is one's eternal experience. That is, this is when we know ourselves as we actually are, it won't appear as a newer knowledge. It'll be clear, that is what I always am, that is what I've always known. That is that ignorance seems real, self-ignorance seems real only from the perspective of ego. When ego is annihilated, it will be clear that we have always known ourselves as we actually are. What we actually are always knows itself as it actually is. And therefore, fear does not exist. That is, in that state, there will be no fear. Imbambodhi, the ocean of happiness, that is the infinite ocean of happiness, is the implication. Therefore, extremely easy is Atma-vichara. So in the fourth verse is the verse where Bhagavan himself explicitly says, more than any other path, this path is exceedingly easy. Because other paths we have to make some effort to go outwards. This is a path we simply have to turn our attention within. But why when Bhagavan said this is so exceedingly easy, why does it seem to us to be so difficult? The answer is very simple, because we don't want it. Because we still have desires and attachments for things other than ourselves. So long as we have desires and attachments for things other than ourselves, we won't want to know ourselves. Because if we know ourselves, that puts an end to ego, and therefore puts an end to all knowledge of anything other than ourselves. So the reason this path, if this path seems difficult to us, as I think most of us will admit, it does seem difficult, but the difficulty lies simply in our lack of love for that. And if we are standing on on the edge of a tall cliff. Nothing is easier than to take one step forward. But which of us will be able to do so? Why we cannot take that step forward? Because we know if we take a step forward, we're going to come tumbling down and meet our end at the bottom in a nasty way. So because of our attachment to this body, we're not able to take that one step forward. For exactly the same reason, because of our attachment to this body and world and this false identity, we are unwilling to put an end to this. So we are unwilling to turn within. So it's only our lack of love to know ourselves, the lack of love to be what we actually are, that makes this seem difficult. But if we really love to know what we are, if we really want to know what we are, it's extremely easy. We can know it here and now. Just as easy as it is, even easier than taking one step forward when you're standing on the top of a cliff. Even easier than that is turning our attention within. It requires no action at all. It's simply a matter of turning our attention back and subsiding back into the heart. But it's our lack of love is the problem. That's why in the next verse, Bhagavan emphasizes Ambu Purnamai. Love is essential. We need to have love for this. Then this last, the fifth verse, Bhagavan there's a lot of ideas packed into this verse. The literal meaning is, in the heart that investigates within, as it is without thinking of anything other, oneself, which is called Āṇma, the one substance, which shines as the eye even to the mind eye, which is the eye to all the sense organs beginning with eyes, which illumine those beginning with space, and at the space even to the mind space will certainly be seen. Grace is certainly necessary. Be adorned with love, happiness will certainly appear. So, as I say, he's packed a lot into here. Essentially what he's saying, in the heart that investigates within, as it is, what he means is when we turn our attention within to investigate ourselves, we thereby subside and remain as we are. That's the significance of the term. He says irandapati, as one literally means as we were. If we remain as we were, so if we investigate within oneself, that's Āṇma, which is called Āṇma. The term he uses here is Āṇma and Āṇma. That can actually be, it actually has two meanings. It can mean oneself, who is called Āṇma. It can also mean Āṇma myself. That is, Bhagavan is indicating here that what is Āṇma? Āṇma is nothing but himself. And that is what will be known. It's himself, and it's also ourself. It's what we actually are. And that is what will be known. And he described what is this Āṇma? He describes it as Oruporo, the one vastu, the one real substance, the one thing that actually exists. And when he talks about turning within, he says, without thinking of anything other, he says, Veru enadu. Veru enadu means not thinking of anything else. So we need to attend to ourselves so keenly that we give no room for any other thought to arise. Then only we are being as we always were. And he describes this Āṇma, the one real substance. He says it shines as Vinadi Vilakum Kannadia Porikum Kannam Manakannakum Kannai. It shines as the eye to the mind eye, which is the eye to the senses, beginning with I, which illumine those beginning with space. What he means here is that is I he uses as a as a um, as a metonym for awareness. So when he says as the eye to the mind eye, he means that the awareness that illumines the mind, thereby enabling the mind to know all these things through the mind is the eye to the five senses. The kannadi porikom means for all the five senses. So it's the mind alone that is seeing through the five senses. And the five senses are what illumine the Vinadya. That means those beginning with space. That means the five elements: space, air, fire, earth, and water and earth. These are called the five elements. Everything is constituted of these five elements. So these are known through the five senses. What knows them? It's the mind. And what is the light that illumines the mind? It is the light of pure awareness. So Āṇma is the eye to the mind eye, which is the eye to the five senses, beginning with I, which illumine all the five elements, beginning with space. Not only is it the mind to the mind eye, it's also mana vinnakam vinnai. It's also the space to the mind space. That is, when he talks in the first line about Vinadya, that is, those that begin with space, he's referring to the five elements. So there, the Vin refers to the physical space. This physical space is contained in what space? It's all contained in the mind space. That is, however vast this universe is, it's all contained within our mind, because it's only, the universe is nothing but a mental impression. So this vast universe, so many billions of light years, extending for so many billions of years, all this vast time and vast space, it's all included in the mind. It's all contained within the mind, because it's the mind alone that conceives all this vastness. And what is the space in which this mind space is contained? It is the space of the infinite space of pure awareness. That is, it's only in this infinite space of pure awareness that the mind appears. And it's only in the mind that this universe appears. So the physical space is called Buddhakasa. The Buddhakasa appears in the Manakasa, the mind space. And the Manakasa appears in the Chittakasa, the consciousness space, the space of pure awareness. So Āṇma is that space of pure awareness in which the mind space appears, in which the physical space appears. And it is the eye to the mind eye, which is eye to the five senses, through which we know the physical space. So he packs so many ideas in here. And that if we investigate within, in the mind that investigates within, in the heart that investigates within, without thinking of anything else, Āṇma, the one portal, the one real substance, which shines in the mind, and so on and so forth, Karname will certainly be seen. But for this, what is necessary? Arulum Vename. Grace is, Arulum, we can take it as meaning, because of we can take it as grace is also needed. But the can have different meanings according to the context. We can also take it as expletive. So Arulum Vename means Arul Vename. It's certainly necessary. Without grace, we will never have the love to turn within to know what we actually are. So grace is absolutely essential. And for that, we should, Arul Ambu Puname, We must be adorned with love. The source of the love is grace itself. Without grace, we cannot even have this love. But it's grace that kindles this love in our heart, and it's the love that opens our heart to the grace. So the love and grace go hand in hand, and this love is absolutely essential, because without that love, we will be unwilling to turn within, because turning within it means stepping over a cliff, not just at the end of his body, the end of the I that is aware of this body as I. So because if we unless we have all-consuming love to know and to be what we actually are, we will not be willing to turn within, and that love comes only from grace. So we need to have that love for grace, which alone will give us the love to know what we actually are. As Bhagavan said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's grace that draws us to this path. It's grace that kindles this love in us and draws us to this path. It's grace that supports and guides us along this path. And finally, grace will swallow us. So it's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And when that grace swallows us, imbu torname, happiness will certainly appear. Happiness here means the infinite happiness, eternal happiness that is our own real nature. So I've talked just the meaning of the verses, but there's so much deep implication in these verses, and it's connected with so many. If each of these verses, each sentence in this verse is connected with so many other aspects of Bhagavan's teaching. So when I explained these verses, I tried to draw out some of the connections between these verses and other teachings of Bhagavan, other works like Uladu Napadu, Nana, Upadeshundiya, Arunachala, Arunachala Stuti Panchakam, and so on. All these are connected. So I've tried in my explanations for each verse to draw out all these connections. I don't expect that this book will ever be a very popular book, because the deeper the teachings we talk about, the less people are interested. But for people who are really interested in Bhagavan's teachings, I think this book, not because of me, but because of anything I've said, because I'm drawing the connection between different places where Bhagavan says, and where Bhagavan expresses the same teaching in different ways. By drawing all these connections, we can see a lot more depth of meaning and depth of implication in this. So for someone who is serious to follow Bhagavan's path, I think this explanation I've written, if it's Bhagavan's will, it'll be useful. But it's not necessarily a book for everyone. It's never going to be a bestseller.
Thank you, Michael, for explaining all
Because
the.
even among the devotees of Bhagavan, very few are really interested in Bhagavan's teachings. For most devotees of Bhagavan, Bhagavan is God. He's to be worshipped, and Bhagavan will take care of us. He'll we have that we treat Bhagavan as God, but he's not just God, he's Guru. Guru is the ultimate role of God. So he's God in the form of Guru. So we need to follow what he has given us in his teaching. This is the supreme treasure. So we are so fortunate to have come to Bhagavan. By his grace, we need to try to take full advantage of this great blessing of being brought to Bhagavan. Yes, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay, Michael. Yeah, so as you explained this, Āṇma Viddai is really important because it has everything, almost all the teachings of Bhagavan, where he explains this is
Yeah,
happiness, this is endless happiness, and
yeah.
trying to achieve anything else in this life by attending to other things is futile. We are
Yeah,
not going to get anything out of it, and all we need is love and grace to attend to ourselves. It also
yeah,
has the practice, like how
yeah,
leaving everything, turning within. So the book is available in Amazon, and as you explained, you have integrated everything, other verses, other works of Bhagavan too, and
yeah,
then gave us the implied meaning
yeah.
behind all
It,
verses.
it's like Bhagavan has given us all his teachings in a seed form in in these verses.
Right, right. Yeah, so it's so important, and it is a very uh, good motivation for us to follow the path.
Yes,
Yes, it's easy, and this is all you have to do.
yes,
There is nothing else that we need to do because we won't
yeah,
get anything else. What else we can get from
yes.
anything else? So
Uh,
it's really a very good motivation for everybody to follow the path.
yes. And can I add one more thing?
Sure, please go ahead.
That is, among Bhagavan's works, there are so many great treasures. So, and many of them people tend to overlook. Just like this Āṇma Viddai is such a precious work. Another extremely important work of Bhagavan's teachings is Arunachashtakam. And at present, I'm writing like I've written for this for this Āṇma Viddai, for Arunachashtakam, I'm writing a detailed explanation for each of the verses. So far, I've completed the first 3 verses, and I'm going to be posting my translation probably during the course of this coming week. I'll be posting my translation on my blog. When I first post it, it'll have only the explanation, detailed explanation for only the first 3 verses. The other verses, I'll write the explanations as and when I have time, and I'll add it later. But Arunachashtakam is very much like this. It's so much deep meaning Bhagavan has packed into Arunachashtakam.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. So I think we have a question from Sanjay Log here. Sanjay, please go ahead, sir, with your question.
So, sir, in one of your videos, you said surrendering ourselves to God is our real nature, but not the real nature of ego. I repeat, surrendering ourselves to God is our real nature, but not the real nature of ego. So this is not clear, sir. Where is the question of surrendering ourselves when we are in our real nature? Thank you.
What I meant is the nature of ego is to go outwards. The nature of our self is to be eternally subsided. Surrender is the state of the subsidence of ego. So surrender is contrary to the nature of ego, but it is our nature. Our nature is just to be as we are without rising. The nature of ego is to rise. The nature of our real nature is just to be. Surrender is the state of just being. Summa Irupadu.
But it is actually not surrender, sir, but then it's state of being. Surrender means you are giving yourself.
Yes, but the the willingness to give ourselves is not the nature of ego. The nature of ego is to always have desire and attachment to go outwards to experience things other than itself. The nature of ourself is just to be as we are, not to rise. So that love to surrender cannot come from ego. It can come only from our real nature. That is why Bhagavan says here, Arulam Vename, grace is absolutely necessary. And that grace, from that grace we get love. And that love is necessary because but only to the extent to which we have love, we will open our heart to the grace. The grace is ever shining there in our heart, but we are turning our back on it by rushing outwards towards the world. So only when we have love to turn back within are we truly yielding ourselves to grace, surrendering ourselves to grace, opening our heart to grace.
It's a very fearful prospect, sir, that one day this ego will go and we lose all connection with this world.
That's
Something
why that's why I use this analogy of standing on the edge of a cliff. If you're standing on the edge of a cliff, taking one step forward, even an old person who can't even walk or a lame person can tumble forward. It's very, very easy, but we're just unwilling to do it. The fear, where does fear come from? If we had no desire, we would have no fear. It's because of our desire, our attachment. We fear to lose all this. We fear the death of this body. How much more we fear the death of this ego. That is why I said it's not the love to surrender cannot come from ego. It can come only from grace. That's why Bhagavan, throughout Stuti Panchakam, Bhagavan emphasizes grace, grace, grace. What he's praying for is grace.
what I was trying to
In
say,
some
sir.
verses, he doesn't even say why he's praying for grace. Giri Yuruvahiye Kirupe Kadale Kripe Kondarula Vayaranachala. Ocean of grace that has become the form of a hill. Kripe Kondarula bestow the grace that is being intensely gracious to bestow grace. That is the Kirupe is a Tamil form of Sanskrit kripa, which means grace, and Aral means grace. So the whole thing is the verse Bhagavan is just praying for nothing but grace, because grace is all that is necessary, and that grace is always available. But we need to yield ourselves to it. The grace is making us, is preparing us, making us willing to yield ourselves to it. But we have to, as Bhagavan said, grace is not something that's going to descend from heaven. Grace is ever present in our heart. But we need to cooperate with it. Now we are resisting the grace by rushing outwards. By turning back within, we are yielding ourselves to grace. And that willingness to yield ourselves to grace comes only from grace. So grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end.
What I was saying was, sir, that I feel so many things depend on me. So if this ego is not here, this person is not here, what will happen to my family and all my responsibilities, something like that.
Yes,
There is
yes. This is Maya. It seems as if everything is dependent on us. But as Bhagavan says in Nana, that one Parameshwara Shakti, it's driving all these cars, everything. Nobody is depending on us. Nothing is depending on us. Everything is depending on that Parameshwara Shakti, that supreme power of grace. Where will we be without grace? We are here only by grace. And that is, we are entirely dependent on grace. But we have this mistaken notion that things depend on us. How ignorant we are. How dense is our ignorance.
we are trying to hold on to things, but that is our ignorance. Means
Yes,
because of
yes.
holding on to things, because of holding on to things, we are in bondage.
The only thing we should hold on to is that grace, which is ever shining in our heart as eye.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I think we have one more question, Michael, from Radhi. Please go ahead.
Yes, Michael, thanks for this wonderful explanation and description of Āṇma Viddai, which is a wonderful book. I bought it. In fact, it's great, and I do read it. I've read it, parts of it. I loved it, including what I've read from your blog. But anyway, getting to the one thing was when you refer to what he says in the verse, where the undivided light of being or awareness and subsiding as I am I. Wouldn't you say ultimately that subsiding is when the subsiding is so complete, the subsidence is so complete that even the I and the form of Arunachalam subsides in awareness? Would you say that?
I means awareness. I is the natural name of awareness. And Arunachala is that awareness. Though Arunachala appears outwardly in the form of a hill, it appears only in the form of a hill in order to teach us the term within, to find the real, the external form, that is the rupa of Arunachala. I is the swarupa of Arunachala.
But even that swarupa of I, as obviously ego subsides even before that. So the I identity is already subsided. But when everything subsides, then when that being is just something which is indescribable. So it cannot even be described as I am I, right?
Well, no words can adequately describe it, but the closest we can come to describing it, describing that experience, is I am I. That is, I am not anything other than I. So, but obviously no words can capture that. That's why Bhagavan said ultimately the real teaching is silence. But these words are pointing us in the right direction. But even without the silence, even these words will be powerless. The words derive their power from silence because they come from Bhagavan, who is Mona Swarupa. He is silence itself.
Yes, definitely. When you see the silence, that is a more complete explanation and in a way more satisfying. Because in one earlier talk, I think it was, I forget which talk it was, where you mentioned we talked a lot about forms, etc., and having an Ishtadevata and a form, and all forms ultimately subsiding in the formless. So the formless is itself another word for silence, which is which maunam, which is that
whether you say Arunachala or Ramana or awareness or Swarupa or silence, they're all pointing at the same one Oruporol, the one reality, the one real substance, what we actually are.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you.
That is the end of the questions, Michael. Do you have anything else to say to conclude?
No, I think I've probably talked too much already.
No. So thank you very much, Michael, for your time.
About this Āṇma Viddai, this is one of the gems of Bhagavan's teachings. But if we take any work of Bhagavan, every work of Bhagavan is a gem. And if we familiarize ourselves with these works of Bhagavan, we will see essentially Bhagavan is saying the same thing, whether it's Aksharamlai or Patikam or Ashtakam or Nana or Uludunaptu or Upadashundya or Āṇma Viddai. All these works, Bhagavan is essentially saying the same thing. It all comes, if we want to summarize all of Bhagavan's teachings in one word, it is subside. It's all, Bhagavan is showing us how to subside, how to be as we actually are.
But I think the special, there's the special message of Āṇma Viddai, which is the most valuable message of this wonderful poem, is the Ati Sulabham,
Ati Sulabham.
Ati Sulabham, because that is what, we all seems to elude us all, that we think that, it's so difficult. We think it's so difficult when you first embark on the path, but we realize it doesn't have to be difficult.
Yes, sir.
It's
But
our unwillingness to give up our ego, which makes it difficult.
that grace that appeared in the form of Bhagavan
Mhm.
also brought Murugana. And that grace also appeared in the form of Murugana to get all these things from Bhagavan. Otherwise, how can we get that? Is because of Murugana, we've got this Āṇma Viddai, Upadeshundya, Uladunapad, all these treasures we got, and of course, Guru Vasika Kavai. But all these things, we wouldn't have got these things if it hadn't been for Murugana. So Murugana cannot be anything other than the grace of Bhagavan, but appeared in the form of Murugana to get all these wonderful teachings from Bhagavan.
Yes. As well as Shiva Prakashan Pillai with his
Of course, yes, of course, yes, yes.
Anyar, you know.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Definitely, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
Namo Bhagavate Sharanach Ramanaya. Thank you, Mike.
Michael. Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.